Okay, so today I'm delighted to be joined by the chairman of the SPRC, Nick Rust, who I'm also delighted to say watched the chat I had with Michael Cannon last week and volunteered to come on and give us all the side of the side of the SP regulators. So Nick, thanks very much. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. What did you think of what Mick had to say?
I think it's great to have a perspective on the SP. There's actually not a lot of discussion about it, I don't think, and there's been a long period of time where there wasn't much change, and then obviously a lot of change happened in and around COVID. Um, and now we're starting to see some analyses and people are commenting on it. And I think that's good because the SP, when it was set up back in the day, it was obviously a mechanism to allow for off-course betting when betting shops were legalized, particularly in the 60s. There was no other method of settling bets back then. Bookmakers generally didn't offer their own prices right up until the 1970s and 80s, off course. I remember starting in betting shops working as a board marker, um, and customers would come in the mid 80s and say, "What are your four early price races going to be today?" And you'd say what the races would be, and the customers would have to wait until 10:30 in the morning to receive those prices. So back in those days when I started in the shop, so 99% of bets would have been at SP. So it was hugely important from that point of view then. Today, as we know, you can bet on races from even run-of-the-mill races from the day before, from as soon as declarations are confirmed and bookmakers start offering their odds mid to late afternoon, of course. So there is no motivation for SP betting for customers. Then they have the option of a choice of prices. So the SP today is far more, as you well know, Simon, is far more about providing really a benchmark, but actually it most often is useful to people who like a bet like me, from best odds guaranteed if they're fortunate enough to be able to get hold of it. So the context is very different, and to hear what Michael was saying, it was great. I mean, what he was saying was you can often find better value at the front of the market at the racecourse, and oftentimes you can, and rather than sort of, if you like, complaining about the SP, I'd be shouting and saying, "This is great! Come and see if you can do a bit better at the racecourse." The SP is largely a tool for off-course bookmakers to settle bets, that the very few bets that have not um, had a price taken, or as I say, on bog. And the SP needs to reflect the market. And back in the 1960s, when SPs were first being formed and there was an off-course market building up, still the substantial part of betting on racing was taking place for any real money at the racetrack. And that obviously has changed over the years with many more access points than betting shops and the internet and so on. And so much so that the official figures from the Gambling Commission have showed over the last 10 years or so that the on-course betting now, it represents between 0.5 and at best 1.5% of turnover from UK customers on racing. The rest of it is all off course. So I think COVID probably forced the hand of my predecessor and his board, Lord Donoghue, to look at the realities of something they'd been considering for a while, I think, which was, does the on-course market truly reflect the nature of the whole of the UK market for betting on racing? And their hand was forced anyway to put emergency arrangements in 2000, because on-course no crowds were permitted at the racecourses. That was my fault as well at the BHA. We had to shut down racing for a period of time and then comply with COVID regulations. So there was no market on the racecourse which could be used to derive an SP. And basically, Nigel Burns and the team at PA, together with Lord Donoghue and the board, approved a system which in effect lifted the principles of what had been in place for a number of years at the racecourses to the off-course market. So a system where you take a sample of prices and divide them into the top half, the bottom half, and you take the lowest price from the top half of prices as your final SP at the off. The system is linked, or rather, Official shows of betting are linked to the way in which the rules for the SP are determined. So our rules, which are published on sprc.org, those are the rules that are generally used to offer shows of betting where bookmakers offer those off course as well. There's been a lot of talk saying, is the SP fair now that it's not taking place with on-course bookmakers? We would love to see on-course bookmakers be part of the sample. Our criteria for an expression of prices in the sample is that you must represent 1% or more of betting on particular races. The on-course market as a whole qualifies for that, as I mentioned the numbers earlier, and there is a mechanism which we could use to deliver those prices. The issue has been that before COVID and with existing racecourse arrangements with on-course bookmakers, there was a payment made for the use of their betting data by the media rights companies. And the media rights companies have, as I understand it, decided not to continue with those arrangements. So I can understand that the on-course bookmaker representatives, so John Hooper at UCORB, Richard Lyle, who I've dealt with in the northern region as well, and others are saying, look, we used to get these payments. Why should we give over our data without those payments? Unfortunately, that's not a matter for me because we receive all of the feeds of prices from other sources without making a payment. And we are independent of thought, but at the end of the day, we report in, if you like, to the media companies, and if they decide that they're not going to make the payments, we have no means of forcing that through. I would still like to see a reflection of on-course prices in the SP, but those negotiations need to make some progress. So today, you look at the SP. There's been a lot of analysis showing that there has been a shift in the way in which the SP is formed versus when it was led only by the on-course market. The front three in the betting are tighter, are poorer value overall on average by between 5 to 8%, depending on when you look at it at the time of year. But if you look at the historical overrounds in general, those have held up very well. There's some information kicking around showing that overrounds grew a lot between 2020 and now. And that's true because in 2020, there was a lot of competition to get customers back betting, I suspect, and we went down to about 1.56 per runner in the SP. Now it's back at historical levels of 1.78, 1.8, sometimes 1.75, around that sort of number, which is what we were seeing in the on-course market before the changes. So there has been a change. There's been a general sort of observation of tightening at the front end. But if you're betting on longer price selections, you're getting better value these days from the SP than you would have done in the prior system. And that's, as you well know from working on course, that's the dynamics of the on-course market and the off-course market, I suspect, being reflected. But we're probably also seeing the impact now of a reduction in concessions, increased place terms is having some impact on the off-course pricing that is feeding into the SP. So, look, we welcome the debate. I've got a group of people around the table at the SPRC board who look at this all the time. We work with the operator PA Media to make sure that we're on top of any concerns about market manipulations and so on. And we don't have any concerns. In my time here, we looked at it closely. We don't really have any concerns at all about that. We've had the odd issue come up where something looks strange. For example, one of the operators started to see a massive drop in the price coming through in the last minute from one of the operators, which would be a massive red flag for us, when we're starting to look at the SPs, if suddenly there was any sign of potential coordinated activity, shall we say. This operator was making a change and switching in its in-play prices a minute before the off. And of course, the in-play prices, shall we say, are a bit more favorable for them. So the in-play feed had gone in and was overriding their pre-race feed. And that was something that we needed to rectify. So we're on this all the time, looking to make sure that people get the best deal in terms of what the market price is. Sorry, I've spent a lot of time giving that overview.
Not at all. I've been not bombarded. I've had lots of stuff sent to me.
Good.
A lot of which I think is between the bookmakers and you. So I'm not going to be here to be like a a scrapper for the bookmakers. But having worked with Turf TV returning the SPs, there's just a few things that I'd like to bring up personally that hopefully might be what people are thinking. I mean, the cynic in me, the first thing I would say is that during COVID, I imagine the Press Association worked out how much cheaper it was to do what they do from off course, and that it really would have suited them to keep it as it was once racing started again. They didn't have to send people to the race course, well, not as many, and the logistics, the expenses, all that. So the cynic would say it's actually a money-saving exercise for the PA.
I don't think it's a cynical thought. I know, having read the discussed with Lord Donoghue and reading all the board papers and so on before I joined, I know that wasn't the motivation in itself, but there's no doubt that there was a considerable saving to the media rights companies by not having that on-course operation to support it. So I don't think you're being cynical at all, and I think it is a consideration for the media rights companies. It has been, because that's a lot of money to support what is a market that is less than 1.5%, even at the big meetings, of the total market on British racing. So, I can understand that, and you'll have seen over the years, and I was involved in it when I was at Ladbrokes and elsewhere, the strange system, really, which has problems as well, of sending money into a small market from a big market to try and adjust prices to reflect off-course liabilities where the main liabilities were. So that has its problems as well. And I think the shift over the last 50, 60 years in terms of where the vast majority of the betting market is at means you'd have to challenge why you would have an operation at that cost. Hugely impressive operation, great integrity, but really to manage individual bookmaker prices and make sure that prices that are on boards are in fact being laid and that there's no manipulation. You'd argue that for 99% of the market where that's not the case, where the prices are visible, where we have evidence of bets being laid and so on, that arguably is more transparent even than the operation we previously had, good though it was.
Yeah, the by the time the Press Association took over, I don't think there was a big firm left on the road. So Hills, Ladbrokes and Corals had all finished on course. And before that, they'd stopped sending any money back to the course because Betfair, the bookmakers hedging into Betfair, made them too strong for what they were pumping back. So that was already something in the past. The other thing I would say is that, yes, it's the same system, but the bookmakers on course had done their business by the time the race was off. So there was absolutely no vested interest in them to return a price shorter than, because the big firm's already gone as well, than what it actually was. And I'm not saying, of course, that they do it, but there's absolutely a vested interest with everybody in the sample now to return a horse as short as possible, because each fraction of a point would save them potentially millions. So yeah, from an integrity point of view, from the outsider looking in, that is a big issue. Well, not an issue, but it's a big difference.
Yeah, I take your point. You're saying that for the majority of on-course bookmakers, the prices that they are offering at the time of the offer of the race doesn't affect any other of their business, because they're generally not offering best odds guaranteed on track, and many of them do not have off-course businesses. I get that and understand that. I think if the market, if there was any evidence of shall we say, price fixing, we would have a pretty good radar on it with the systems that we have. And if you've seen what PA had in the past for its on-course operations, you'll understand the type of systems that are in place, monitoring price movements and so on. And they're more sophisticated now, and we're about to publish a video which shows, which is overdue, which shows our operation in action. I get that point totally. If there's any evidence of collusion, then, that's criminal activity, as you know, and it needs to go to the Competition and Markets Authority, frankly. If we spot anything like that in our remit, we will be raising it. First of all, in the example I gave earlier about, this is looking strange, we raise it obviously with the provider. And if we've got concerns, we would raise it with the competition authorities. We haven't seen anything that concerns us in that regard, and we see enough strength in the competitiveness pre-race of the off-course market to suggest that that's unlikely to happen, or that if it was, you would see it literally at the last 30 seconds, 1 minute, and so on. And we're not really seeing evidence of that. If people have got views on that and they've got some evidence where they think that they're seeing a pattern like that, then we'd be delighted to hear from them. But our own monitoring suggests that's not the case. But yes, you're right. Arguably, there is a perception issue there, at the very least, around that side of things. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, who is the SP for? It's for off-track customers, largely provided by or abided by off-track operators, very often in the context of best odds guaranteed, for those majority of customers who can get that. The sharper ones will struggle with that, of course, but the majority of customers will be able to avail themselves of that. The off-course bookmakers have got a choice. They don't have to use the SP, but they've still got faith in it. They, in our discussions with them, they want to see the SP's integrity being maintained because they believe it gives customer confidence. So I don't sense a sort of, maybe when I was back at Ladbrokes 25 years ago, some of the guys there were concerned when Betfair came in about, oh my goodness, we got liabilities well out of kilter and not sure if we're going to be able to go with the SP. I don't sense that at all. They, the main off-course firms and the smaller ones want to maintain the integrity of the SP. So I don't think that, there's an active movement to manipulate it. But at the end of the day, they have liabilities that they want to make sure are in line. And of course, if you are trading, you're going to have in your head that I'm trading this price now, but I'm also, I've got to think about all of the liabilities I'm building up. So yes, I accept that there is a slight change in the dynamics there, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, we already sort of agreed that at the lower end of the market, there has been a percentage of shorter prices as compared to the outside, the outsiders. The other thing was the on-course books,
and vice versa.
Yeah. The other thing was I'm just going through the differences. That's all. Yeah, the on-course bookmakers arguably didn't know they were in the sample. They didn't know they were in the sample because it was a sacking offence to tell any bookmaker if they're in it. But you wouldn't have had to be Mrs. Marple to work out that Brooks Corals, whatever, would have been in there.
My sense is they knew they were in, but they didn't know they were in.
They knew they were in if they were one of the big firms on the rails, probably at the smaller meetings. But I've seen reps running around, in a fluster because sometimes we had 18, 20 bookmakers in the sample. And when it came to trying to guess the 10 intats of the 60 or 70 that there were, maybe they didn't know. But I'm assuming that the people in the sample now do know they're in the sample.
They know they're in the basket, but the way the sample is set, the way the sample is set, and there's a good chance they'll be in because as we've said, we only have 7 providing that. So that is an area. That is one of the reasons I would like to have an on-course expression in. It's one of the reasons why we're trying to encourage other firms, even though they represent a small part of the market. The firms we've got in place represent probably 82% of the market for horse racing. We choose 6 from 7, determined by some rules and by rotation and chance. So if the rules pick out a clear 6, which sometimes they will, especially in races of 14 runners with 4 places being offered in certain places, that will spit out a certain group of 6, and very often one of the operators, Skybet, is an outlier. But the rest of the time, assuming there's a level playing field on place terms and various other things, then in effect there's a random randomized sample of 6 from 7 taken. But yes, it limits the sample variety. I accept that point. But where we're splitting that into 2 groups and you're taking, the highest amongst the top half, sorry, the lowest price amongst the top half of prices. When we analyze that, there's still quite a lot of variety at the off. Surprises me, actually, quite a lot of variety at the off in terms of the pricing offered. When I go on track these days, when you get near to the off and you look at the top of the market, there isn't a huge amount of variety. There is a little bit more off track, but, arguably, as we said before, quite a lot you're going to have the opportunity for a slightly better price on track near the off.
Yeah, I mean, when we were returning them from on course, if there were 6 in the sample and there were 3 at 5-2 and 3 at 9-4, the SP would be 5-2. But anyway,
well, as it would under our system as well, because it would be the lowest of the 3 5-2s.
Yeah. Okay. No, just
in effect, the system has been developed. The emergency system lifted the principles of the on-course system.
Yeah. Okay. There's just 2 more things I want to mention. Is it not in the interest of racing that on-course bookmakers remain relevant to the way things work?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's not necessarily my job to sort, however. But yes, and I've spent a lot of time with the leaders of UCORB and other organisations. Lots of good people. I spend a lot of time going racing whenever I can, and I will always go into the ring and I will try and speak to as many people as I can without interfering with their businesses. It is important. I have tried to encourage them to go to the race courses with whom they have their agreements and to revisit the arrangements, which seem to me to be, shall we say, out of date. And so the 2012, was it, contracts that were largely put in place, they're sort of out of date, but the bookmakers are being held to them. Things like unable to offer varied place terms, unable to, operate certain bet types and so on, unable to do certain things that I think are kind of out of date. They need to go and renegotiate their terms. I know that's not easy, but I've been trying to help and suggest how that might happen. And I think there's a great story about on-course bookmakers, and the best ones are out there, not worrying about this. They're getting out there and they're doing their very best, and they're shouting about the value that they can get. Now, obviously, we're seeing an uptick in the on-course market now, not necessarily for all the very most optimistic reasons for the future, but partly because there are restrictions taking place through affordability checks and so on in the off-course market. Now, the bookies have got their tails up a little bit, I sense, at some of the big meetings, and they're saying, oh, you can get a big bet on here. My advice would be don't talk up the big bets so much, because very shortly you'll have the Gambling Commission saying, what are you doing to manage affordability for this customer? And I would talk optimistically about the market and the great value that you can have, and I would start renegotiating my terms. And what is this marketing fee for? Why am I paying a multiplier per bookmaker badge without any guarantees about the size of the crowd that you're going to bring me? These things are out of date, and actually I would encourage them to press on that regard. And if they want to be part of the SP sample, fantastic. If that helps them be more part of it, fantastic. I'm not in a position where I can reinstate their fees. That's for them to negotiate if they wish to with the media rights companies. But we would welcome them back into the sample as soon as they are willing to let us have their prices, and we would have another expression of prices in there. So yes, very important, and I would like to help them if I can.
Yeah, the reporting of the big bets, that's a criticism I get with some of the coverage I do. But I just report on what happens, I noticed that this bookmaker's saying it to me as well. I get a lot of criticism from other bookmakers, and to be honest, those big bets are reportable because they're so rare. Mostly the business is up because I think lots of more 50s and 100s and stuff. But that's a good point. Now, the final thing I want to mention. Now, this was a real bone of contention with a lot of people, and I've had all sorts of facts and figures and stuff that I'm not going to go into because I don't know if they're right. But it's also something I've noticed when I'm writing a blog, trying to finish it off by saying it returned. Why is it that, and this is most of this stuff, because I'm not suggesting there's anything iffy going on with any of this, but it's all about visuals, the fact that it's returned from the bookmakers that they've got vested interest, the racecourse bookmakers, all that. But why is it when I was working with Turf TV, when we pressed the off button, that was the SP. I was on the phone to the Press Association, and we're on the phone down to John McCroke in the ring. Unless it was a 30 runner, 5 furlong sprint, the prices were given to the Press Association and the press before the race had finished. Now, so often the SPs don't come up for what seems like an eternity. I mean, this should be almost possible, especially in national hunt racing, to scroll the SP across the bottom of any screen that is showing your prices. And even if there's nothing wrong, it once again is visuals. It's people are thinking, well, why, are they working it out after the race what the SP should be? Now, I'm sure you're going to tell us that doesn't happen, but why can't the SPs be put up on the screen as soon as the PA's gone? Because now the PA don't even have to wait for them to be told. They've got them immediately. So they don't even have to have me on the telephone reading them down. They've got them. As soon as that button is pressed, that is the SP, where it used to be. So, I don't want to labour a point, but why can't they put them up, bang, just like that?
So it happens exactly like that. The SP is determined within about a second of the off of the race, I think, and we keep records of all of that. And under normal circumstances, that's automatically fed into a ticker. And if you are watching racing TV or watching Sky Sports Racing, I'm not saying it happens every time, but that is going out to those channels immediately. There's no issue whatsoever with doing this. Now, if people are saying, "Oh, crikey, I'm looking at this channel or this publication and I'm not seeing it," then I welcome hearing about that, because we push it out there. We push it out there, and as you know, PA's got a lot of sophisticated ways of feeding out data directly into captions and so on as well for where they provide services. It just goes. So I totally agree, because if I have to hear, oh, it's being made up and they're working out their liabilities once more, I mean, what nonsense. I'm sorry to say, that's nonsense. These are the prices that were available and being traded in the market at the time of the off. And if you go onto our website sprc.org and you follow the methodology and you're looking even at, let's say, an odds checker or something, there's a pretty good chance you can work out the SP as well, and then look at the ticker that's already come through and you'll find out that it matches up. So there's nothing to hide. There's no concerns. And what I'd say is, look, the SP is there for people. In the first year that we analysed it, something like £600 million of best odds guaranteed value was determined by the SP. And I'm not saying anyone should get any thanks for that, but that is what the off-course bookmakers are still committing to offer, because they have faith in it. And we get very, very few. I'm surprised. We get very, very few queries and complaints about the SP. The biggest complaint we've had this year about the SP was the 33-1 return of the Grand National winner, and that complaint came from some off-course bookmakers who were saying, well, I was offering 20 deliberately because I wanted to keep it on side. Yes, you were, but you were in the bottom half of the median and the bottom half, and the lowest price of the three and the median in the sample was 33. Therefore, it's returned 33. So, we actually get more from the off course than we do from the public. I find it amazing, actually, and that's why I welcome this sort of discussion. I welcome Mick raising it. I welcome Mr. Lovell raising things. I welcome the Horse Race Bettors Forum raising stuff. We should have a discussion about it. It's good. And so I thank you for letting me come on.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, just going back to those prices, so basic, especially when you're on course, maybe it's just ITV that are a bit slow putting them up, because quite often the name of the winner will come up where the SP always used to be there. And I know from frustration for trying to finish off the last paragraph of my blog that I'm typing in the rain that it's quite often not there. But anyway, so you're putting them out bang as they always used to be. So okay, so I'm hoping that there'll be a bit of conversation about this. Thanks very much for giving your time up, Nick, because I'm not ITV and I'm not the racing channel, it's just me. So I do appreciate you sort of giving your time to my little thing, but hopefully it'll get out there to people. And I'm sure I'll get a bit of stick for not asking all the things that I've been sent, but the bookmakers can have their own discussion with you and provide, because also I don't want to get sued. They can provide their evidence if they want to say that something is happening. It's
Sure. I
not,
mean,
you know.
if there's any follow-ups to you that you feel weren't covered, I know you've got your website as well. So if you want to follow up with it, I'm very happy to provide any answers anytime. Our annual report will be out soon, and it will show, all our work again and the challenges and issues that we've faced this year. So I encourage people to have a look at our website.
Okay, so this will be going out on YouTube, so you can comment underneath on YouTube. Anyone that knows me, obviously, they can just get in touch. Can they get in touch with you, Nick?
There's an email address on the SPRC.org where you can reach us at any time, and we normally respond within 48 hours.
Brilliant. So there you go, everyone. So Nick Rust, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just a quick one. If you have enjoyed these videos and are enjoying these videos, can you please like and subscribe to my channel? Thanks very much.